Welcome back, everyone. We've got an awesome deep dive planned for you today, all about freedom in companies, that is.
Freedom in companies, huh? Sounds interesting.
It is, really. It all started with this book, Freedom, Inc.
Freedom think.
Yeah, by Brian M. Carney and Isaac Getz. You sent over some excerpts from it.
Oh, right. Yeah, those are fascinating.
They were, weren't they? The book dives into these companies that have ditched the whole traditional management thing, the rigid hierarchies, all that jazz.
So instead of micromanaging and all that, they're doing what?
Well, they're embracing, as the book puts it, a freedom-based approach.
Freedom-based. Okay. So basically giving their employees more autonomy, letting them make decisions.
Exactly. And the book uses this really cool analogy, buyer companies versus renter companies.
Buyer versus renter, huh? I like that. Tell me more.
So buyer companies, they're the ones who really invest in their employees.
See them as valuable assets, not just cogs in a machine.
Right. They trust them to make decisions, even bending the rules sometimes if it benefits the customer.
Or aligns with the company's values, right? That's interesting. Renter companies, on the other hand, they're more.
More transactional. Control mechanisms, rigid processes, that sort of thing. The book had this fascinating example, Harley-Davidson.
Harley-Davidson, I wouldn't exactly picture them as a freedom-based company.
Me neither. But they actually involve their unions in their decision-making.
Wow, really? Involving the unions, that's pretty unconventional.
It is. And the book says it's led to some really positive outcomes. More informed decisions, better relationships between management and labor.
And probably a happier, more productive workforce, right?
Absolutely. They give a specific example, the restructuring of their manufacturing process.
Oh, yeah, when they had to adapt to all that rising competition, that must have been a tough decision to make.
Definitely. But by getting the union involved from the start, they managed to work through any concerns, find solutions that everyone could agree on.
Smart move. That's way better than just forcing a change and dealing with all the pushback later.
Exactly. Another example the book gave was USAA, the financial services company.
Oh, yeah, USAA. I've heard good things about them. What do they do?
They empower their employees to go above and beyond for their customers, even if it means bending the rules.
Bending the rules. That sounds risky. What if someone takes it too far?
It's a valid concern, and the authors do address it. They say USAA invests heavily in training their employees.
Makes sense. Instilling a strong sense of ethical responsibility, I imagine.
Right. They emphasize that freedom comes with responsibility, acting in the best interest of both the customer and the company.
It's a delicate balance, finding that sweet spot between empowerment and control.
It is, and they do have mechanisms in place for those rare situations where an employee might overstep.
More about education and correction than punishment, I'd guess.
Exactly, creating a culture of learning and continuous improvement.
hmm
Now, another company the book highlights is FVI, a French company that makes automotive parts.
FAVI, okay. What's their story?
Well, they gave their factory workers a ton of autonomy, even sending them directly to client sites to solve problems.
Sending factory workers to client sites, that's pretty unusual. Most companies try to keep those two worlds separate.
It is. But the CEO, Jean-Francois Zobrist, he believed that the people closest to the problems were the best ones to solve them.
Makes sense, actually. They have the hands-on experience. They see the issues firsthand.
Exactly. And this approach led to more innovation, better quality, and a more engaged workforce. But I'm sure there were concerns about giving those workers so much freedom.
Oh, I bet. Safety, quality control, maybe even costs, right?
Yeah.
All the things that make managers nervous.
Exactly. But FLVIA addressed those concerns with lots of training, clear communication, and by building a culture of shared responsibility.
So instead of relying on top-down control, they made sure everyone felt like they owned the process, owned the outcome.
Exactly. And that made everyone more proactive about identifying and addressing potential problems before they became big issues.
It's like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Much better to prevent a problem than try to fix it after the fact.
Now, the book emphasizes that it's not enough to just give people freedom. You also need a clear company vision.
A North Star, so to speak, something to guide all those individual decisions and make sure they're moving the company in the right direction.
Exactly. And the authors use this great example. Bob Davids, the founder of Sea Smoke Cellars, a high-end winery.
Okay, winemaking, freedom. This should be interesting. What did he do?
He used to review his winemaker's supply list, not to cut costs, but to make sure every decision, even the smallest ones, aligned with their vision of making world-class wine.
So it wasn't about micromanaging, it was about ensuring that everyone was on the same page, striving for that shared goal.
Exactly. He trusted his winemaker to make the day-to-day decisions, but he also wanted to make sure those decisions were in line with their overall vision.
It's like those guardrails you see on a winding road. You're free to drive, but those guardrails keep you from going off the cliff.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance, but it's one that these freedom-based companies seem to navigate really well.
Finding that sweet spot between freedom and accountability, empowering individuals while keeping everyone aligned with the company's goals. It's fascinating stuff. It's not just about perks or a relaxed work environment, right?
No, not at all. It's about creating a culture where people genuinely feel valued,
Yeah.
trusted.
Empowered to do their best work. Intrinsic motivation, not just carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
And the book mentions how this can be a challenge for some leaders, those used to a more traditional approach. They gave this example of Jean-Francois Zobrist, again, the CEO of FAVI.
Oh, yeah, the guy who sent the factory workers to the client sites. What
Yes.
happened? Did his executives push back?
Some did. They just didn't grasp the concept. They thought freedom and respect were okay for management, but not for, regular employees, like people doing data entry or working on the factory floor.
So, like, those employees need more direction, more supervision, that kind of thinking.
Exactly. The old thinkers versus doers mentality.
But Zobrist clearly didn't buy into that. How did he convince them otherwise?
He was patient. He knew changing those beliefs would take time. He just kept having those open conversations, explained his vision, why he thought it would work. He also invested in training programs.
So he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk.
Exactly. And eventually, even the most skeptical executives started coming around. They saw with their own eyes how empowered employees were more innovative. The quality of their work went up. Everyone was just more engaged.
It's proof that you can change a company's culture, even if it's deeply ingrained. Did the authors give any tips on how to do that, how to create those conditions for change?
They did. Communication, keeping those lines open, being willing to let go of some of that control, and of course, leading by example.
Show them, don't just tell them, right?
Exactly. And speaking of communication, the book talks a lot about how important open communication is in these freedom-based companies. No secrets, no hoarding information.
Makes sense. When information flows freely, it builds trust. Kind of like Stan Richards in those stairwell meetings we talked about earlier. Everyone, no matter their position, gets the same info at the same time.
That's a great example. It shows employees that leadership trusts them with the truth, even if it's not all good news. That level of transparency is rare.
It's definitely the opposite of the need-to-know approach that you see in a lot of companies.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying, we don't trust you enough to handle this.
And that kills innovation. When people have all the information, they can connect the dots, see the bigger picture, and come up with amazing ideas.
Exactly. Now, one thing I've been wondering about is how these companies sustain their freedom-based cultures over time as they grow, as leadership changes. That seems tricky.
It's a constant challenge for sure. Like tending a garden, you got to keep weeding out those bureaucratic tendencies that always seem to creep in. It takes intentionality, a real commitment to those core values.
So what are some of the ways they do that? How do they prevent themselves from slipping back into old habits?
Well, one way is by constantly reinforcing the culture. W.L. Gore, for instance, they have their own unique language within the company.
Okay, that's interesting. Like their own secret code. What do they say?
Instead of employees, they have associates. Instead of managers, they have sponsors. And they have this thing called a credibility bucket.
A credibility bucket. Was that some kind of scoring system?
Not literally, but it's this idea that you build credibility by showing your commitment to the company's values, by contributing to its success.
So it's not about your job title. It's about how you show up, how you contribute.
Exactly. And it ties back to that freedom with responsibility idea. You're free to make decisions, take ownership, but you're also accountable for the results.
Makes sense. The more you prove you can handle that responsibility, the more your credibility grows. Are there other examples of how they reinforce the culture?
Oh yeah, Harley-Davidson, they have this intense onboarding program for new hires. It's like a 6-month immersion experience.
6 months. Wow, that's serious.
They're committed to making sure everyone understands the company's philosophy, the whole freedom and responsibility thing. They want everyone to feel like they're truly part of the team right from the start.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about finding the right people, but also giving them the tools and support to thrive in that environment. Now, we've talked a lot about the benefits of this freedom-based approach, but There have to be some downsides, right?
Well, it's not perfect, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The book acknowledges it's not for everyone, and there are some challenges. One of the big ones is finding the right people. Not everyone thrives in an environment with so much freedom.
Some people need more structure, more direction, or maybe the responsibility feels overwhelming.
Exactly. The book mentions Bob Kofsky, the founder of Sun Hydraulics. He estimated that maybe a quarter of the people who applied to work there just couldn't handle the freedom.
A quarter. That's a lot. How did they figure that out? Did they have some special screening process?
Oh, yeah. They had a tough hiring process. Behavioral interviews, simulations, even personality assessments, all designed to find people who not only had the skills, but also the right mindset for their company.
So it's not just about technical skills. It's about finding people who are comfortable with autonomy, who are self-motivated.
Exactly. It's about cultural fit. You have to find people who are naturally aligned with the company's values and way of doing things.
Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Now, what about when things don't work out? When an employee isn't performing well, or maybe they're just not a good fit for the culture?
Well, that's where that freedom with responsibility thing comes in. These companies are very tolerant of mistakes. They encourage experimentation. But ultimately, everyone's accountable for their actions and their performance.
So there are consequences, even in this environment, that emphasizes freedom.
Oh, yeah, it's not a free-for-all. There are expectations, there's guidance, and ultimately, people are held accountable for results. If someone's consistently underperforming, or maybe their behavior is hurting the team, well, there are consequences.
So it's finding that balance, right? Freedom, but also accountability. Now, what about keeping those great employees? Do these freedom-based companies struggle with high turnover?
Funny enough, the opposite seems to be true. They tend to have really low turnover rates, even though they don't always offer the highest salaries. The book talks about the psychic income of working in a fulfilling environment.
Do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, right?
Exactly. It's what they call the culture of happiness. People feel valued, they're passionate about their work, they have a sense of purpose. And they're not constantly stressed out by all that bureaucracy and micromanaging.
Makes you wonder why more companies aren't doing this right. If it makes employees happier and leads to better business outcomes.
That's the million-dollar question. The authors suggest that a lot of leaders are just stuck in the old ways of thinking. They believe control is the key to efficiency.
They're afraid to let go of the reins, afraid that giving people freedom will lead to chaos.
But as we've seen from the examples in the book, that's not necessarily true. When you trust people, when you empower them, they often step up and exceed expectations. It can be a real win-win.
So why aren't more companies embracing this? Are they just stubborn?
Well, it's not always just stubbornness. Sometimes it's a lack of trust. Leaders just don't believe their employees can handle the responsibility.
Or maybe they just don't know how to do it, how to create and sustain this kind of culture.
That's another point the authors make. It's not always about unwillingness. Sometimes it's a lack of understanding. They need guidance. They need to see examples of how it can work. And that's what's so great about this book.
It's a practical guide, not just theoretical fluff. It shows them how to make it happen.
Exactly. And it's not limited to certain industries or company sizes. This philosophy can work anywhere.
That's encouraging. It means we all have the power to create more freedom in our work lives, even if we can't change the whole company culture overnight.
Start small. Challenge your own assumptions about how work should be done. Delegate more. Create a more open communication environment. Every little bit helps.
Like that Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has."
Perfectly said. Change starts with individuals, then it ripples outward. If enough of us embrace this idea of freedom and responsibility, who knows what we can achieve?
Okay, I'm feeling inspired. Let's bring it back to the book for a minute. What else did the authors talk about?
Well, they really emphasize the importance of having clear values, values that guide decision-making throughout the company.
Like a compass, right?
Right.
Helping everyone stay on course even when they have a lot of freedom to choose their own path.
Exactly. But those values can't just be empty words. They have to be deeply embedded in the company's culture, reflected in everything they do.
Actions speak louder than words. Did they give any examples of how companies do this?
Oh, yeah, they talked about W.L. Gore and their waterline principle. It's this idea that you can make any decision as long as it doesn't sink the ship, metaphorically speaking.
I like that. It sets boundaries, but within those boundaries, people are free to make decisions. Any specific examples of how that plays out?
They gave an example of a team of engineers who were working on a new fabric. They ran into a technical problem that could have delayed the whole project. But instead of going to their boss for help, they decided to solve it themselves. They brainstormed, experimented, and came up with a workaround that not only fixed the problem, but actually made the product even better.
That's awesome. It shows how empowering people can lead to both innovation and efficiency. And it takes a lot of trust to let your team make those decisions, especially when they're doing things differently than you might have done them.
Trust is key, and it's something you build over time, through actions, through consistency. The book makes it clear that creating this kind of culture is an ongoing process. You have to keep working at it, adapting and fine-tuning your approach.
It's a journey, not a destination. And it sounds like leadership plays a huge role in that journey. What do they say about leadership in these freedom-based companies?
They dedicate a big chunk of the book to leadership. They argue that leaders in these companies have to be more than just managers. They have to be visionaries, mentors, facilitators, creating the conditions for their teams to thrive.
Okay, so what are some of the qualities of these liberating leaders, as they call them?
Well, they have a deep understanding of human nature. They know that people are inherently good, that they want to do meaningful work. They're also comfortable letting go of control. They trust their teams to make decisions.
It's a very different style of leadership than what we see in a lot of companies. Do they give any examples of leaders who do this well?
They do. One great example is Laisa Juronen, the CEO of SOL, a cleaning company in Finland. Her whole philosophy was about organizing success. She created a culture of trust and empowerment, giving her employees the freedom to manage their own work.
And what were the results? Did it actually work?
It did. SOL became known for incredible customer service, happy employees, and great financial performance. They even won awards for being a top workplace. Juronen really believed that by empowering her people, treating them with respect, everyone would benefit.
That's amazing. It's proof that this stuff can work, even in industries that aren't known for being super innovative or employee-centric.
Exactly. It all comes down to leadership. When leaders create the right environment, amazing things can happen.
But it's not easy to be that kind of leader.
Right. It takes a certain type of person, a willingness to let go, a belief in the potential of others. The book acknowledges that these liberating leaders are exceptional.
But they also say their principles can be learned.
Right, exactly. It's not some unattainable utopia. We can all strive to create more freedom in our work lives, even if we're not the CEO.
We can challenge those assumptions about how work should be done, right?
Exactly. Ask yourself, do we really need all these rules? Could we achieve more by trusting people? What if we created a culture where it was okay to experiment and even fail sometimes?
Big questions, but important ones for all of us to think about. And it doesn't have to be some grand, sweeping change. Small steps can make a big difference.
Give your team more responsibility. Be more transparent with information. Encourage feedback and open discussion. Every little bit counts.
And those small changes can spread, right? Create a ripple effect.
That's the hope. That if enough of us embrace this idea of freedom and responsibility, we can change the way we work and live for the better.
Okay, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's wrap things up. Any final thoughts on the book? Anything else we should highlight?
They talk about the potential downsides of freedom, the risks of things getting out of control, people not being held accountable.
Right, those are valid concerns. How do they suggest companies deal with that?
Clear communication, well-defined boundaries, and a culture of personal responsibility. Make sure everyone knows the company's values, what's expected of them, set clear goals, provide regular feedback.
So it's not just about letting everyone do whatever they want.
No, there's a structure, but it's a structure that's based on trust and empowerment, not control and micromanagement.
Makes sense. It's about finding that balance. So last question, if this approach is so effective, why isn't it more common?
The authors give a few reasons. One is just inertia. Companies are resistant to change, even if it's for the better. They're comfortable with the status quo.
Change can be scary, especially for big companies. What else?
Sometimes it's a lack of trust. Leaders are afraid to let go of control. They don't believe their employees can handle it.
But the examples in the book show that they often can and often exceed expectations when given the chance.
Exactly. And sometimes it's just a lack of understanding. Leaders don't know how to create this kind of culture. They haven't seen it in action. And that's where the book comes in.
It shows them the way. It gives them practical advice and inspiring examples.
Exactly. And the best part is this approach isn't limited to certain industries or company types. It can work anywhere.
It's about changing the way we think about work, about leadership,
It's about creating a work environment that's more humane, more fulfilling, more aligned with what people actually want and need. It's amazing how these companies challenge those traditional organizational structures. Like they're really questioning that whole hierarchy thing.
It's like they're saying, forget those org charts, those boxes and lines that try to define everyone.
Exactly. Those things create silos, they stifle collaboration. It's all about control, not empowerment.
The book mentions Jean-François Zobrist, again, the CEO of FAVI. He had this interesting way of describing those traditional org charts. He called them the company's stomach.
Oh, yeah. He said, how can a company be successful if it's totally focused on its stomach and totally ignores where the food comes from the client?
Such a great analogy. They get so caught up in their internal power struggles that they forget who they're supposed to be serving.
Exactly. And a lot of these companies have ditched those traditional org charts completely.
Like Gore? They don't even have job titles, which seems crazy to me. So how do they organize themselves if they don't have those roles and hierarchies?
Instead of assigning people to specific jobs, they encourage them to make commitments based on what they're good at and what they're interested in.
So it's more fluid.
Yeah.
People can move around, take on different challenges as the company's needs change.
Exactly. It prevents all that competition and infighting that you see in companies where everyone's trying to climb the ladder. At Gore, it's all about your contributions, not your title.
But is it really sustainable? Can a company actually function without any structure at all?
Well, it takes a lot of trust, communication, shared understanding. It's not for everyone, but Gore's been doing it successfully for decades, so it's definitely possible.
They're kind of a unique case, but a fascinating one. How do they actually manage it? How do they make sure things get done, decisions get made, without those traditional lines of authority?
It all goes back to those core values: freedom, responsibility, trust. Individuals are empowered to initiate projects, assemble teams, make decisions, and there's a lot of emphasis on peer feedback and accountability. Everyone's expected to pull their weight.
So it's very decentralized, very self-managed. But what about conflicts? When people disagree about how things should be done?
That's where strong communication and trust come in. They encourage open dialogue, debate, compromise. They also have ways to resolve disputes fairly, usually involving a neutral third party or a group of peers.
It sounds like a very mature way of working, but not everyone would be comfortable with that level of ambiguity.
You're right. It's not for everyone. And the book does mention the challenge of finding people who are comfortable with so much freedom and responsibility.
It's not just about skills, it's about personality, mindset.
Exactly. And Gore has a very specific hiring process designed to find those people. Behavioral interviews, simulations, peer assessments. They're looking for people who are a good cultural fit, not just someone who looks good on paper.
So it's about building a team, not just filling positions.
Exactly. And that team focus extends to their compensation system, too. They don't do individual bonuses. They reward teams for their collective achievements.
Interesting. So every aspect of their organization, from their structure to their rewards, is designed to reinforce those core values.
It's all about alignment. When everything fits together, the structure, the culture, the people, it creates something really powerful.
It's like a well-oiled machine, but one that's powered by passion and creativity, not just rules.
That's what's so exciting about these companies. They're not just businesses. They're like social experiments. They're showing us that there's a better way to work, a better way to lead.
They're achieving amazing results and creating a more fulfilling work experience for their employees. It's a powerful message, especially now when so many people are feeling burned out and disillusioned with work.
It's a glimpse into a future where work is about more than just a paycheck. It's about making a difference, following your passions, finding purpose.
And that future is within our reach. It starts with individuals, with leaders who are willing to challenge the status quo and create those conditions for people to thrive.
So, for our listeners out there, what can they do? Even in their own small ways, how can they start creating a more freedom-based environment?
Ask those tough questions. Do we really need all these rules? Can we trust people more? Can we create a culture where it's okay to experiment and even fail?
Those are the right questions to be asking. And you don't have to be the CEO to make a difference. Start small. Delegate more. Be more transparent. Encourage open communication. Every step counts.
Small changes can have a big impact. They can inspire others to do the same.
If enough of us embrace this idea, this philosophy of freedom and responsibility, we can change the way we work. We can create a better future for ourselves and for everyone.
What an inspiring way to end our deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of freedom in the workplace. We hope you've learned as much as we have and that you're feeling inspired to make a difference in your own work life.